Hello and welcome to the Jake Mix Marketing Podcast. Today I am in Salt Lake City, Utah, talking to Travis Tidball, who is the Executive Vice President of Marketing at Filevine. And you've probably heard of Filevine. You might not know exactly what they do unless you're in the legal space, but we have Travis here to kind of help us explain his role and some of the marketing expertise that he has. So Travis, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today.
Yeah, Jake, thanks for having me.
Well, absolutely. Well, this is fantastic. We're here in your gorgeous building up here. And you said you moved into this building about a year ago, or when did you move in?
I think we officially were able to move in March of 2020.
Okay.
Probably about the worst time to be able to actually move into a space. So we kind of slow burned it for a little while. We did our official opening ceremony in August of 2020.
Okay. Well, awesome. And you were telling me before this interview that you have most of your employees working from home still.
That's right. Yeah, we are a fully hybrid remote kind of combo office. Our staff is, for the most part, remote. We have some that prefer to come into the office. It's up to the staff if they'd like to come in or not.
Sure.
It's kind of a big point of controversy right now. I think that's playing out, but our opinion is people should work in the places that they're the most effective.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, well, great. Well, Travis, I'm super excited to be able to talk to you. From what I've seen on LinkedIn, and obviously that doesn't uncover the whole story, but you just have an extensive amount of marketing experience. At least in your last 3 roles, you've worked for DigiCert. I think there's just some really, really big companies. You said you came from DC. And so I'm just so excited to be able to kind of pick your brain a little bit. So let's get started here. And I want to talk a little bit about your background, because from the history, it's been all marketing, but I don't know if that's truly the case. And so would you mind just giving a little bit of a fast forward version of your career, how you kind of came into the marketing space and how you're now kind of have come to this EVP of Marketing at Filevine?
Yeah, I mean, wow, somehow I've got to figure out how to condense 15 years into a couple of salient points here. So feel free to cut me off if I start going a little too long. It's funny to hear you say that I've been pretty deeply involved in marketing, because still to this day, I don't think of myself as a marketer. I actually had zero intention of going into marketing. I kind of still wonder how it happened. I was somebody who, and still am someone that loves entrepreneurship. That's my passion. I love growing business. I left school with the notion, in fact, during school, had the plan to start my own business. And I was looking for a company that, debating whether to say this, I was looking for a company that I thought had a good chance of failing. And so I was looking for a startup, because I knew that most startups fail within a few years of operations. I think something like 80% of companies is sort of the stat that gets thrown out. And I found this little startup that was a small company. I had a friend that was working there. He told me a little bit about it. It was this little company, had 6 employees. It was called DigiCert. This was 2006, and their whole business model was about verifying companies online. And I just thought, well, that can't really be a business, sort of just proving identities. So I went out there and started working because it was a great college job. I thought it was a good chance to sort of learn about that company and the mistakes that they made along the way towards the path to failure.
Right.
Turned out clearly not the case. I actually ended up spending 10 years at DigiCert.
Oh my.
And, the business grew from 6 employees to, roughly 1,000 while I was there. Founded the sales team, founded the marketing team. And really, my job was essentially helping the business to grow. And from the earliest days, it was around sort of whatever it took to help grow that business. And at the earliest days, I was doing, accounts payable, I was doing, calls to customers, customer support, virtually everything inside the business. But as the business grew, my role became more specialized, but I was always sort of at the center of revenue growth for that business. And I think that gave me a pretty unique perspective on marketing. I sort of was one of the first generation digital natives going into marketing. And so DigiCert was purely digital grown. We didn't sort of use a lot of traditional marketing methods at the time. And it's interesting because I think the pendulum has somewhat swung to the sense that most businesses appear to be, at least in the SaaS space, digital first.
Right.
But it really sort of helped me kind of understand what that looked like and I think have a fresh perspective towards it. So for others, it may have been more difficult to adapt what they were doing. But for me, I was able to actually take this approach and sort of learn with a sort of naivety that allowed me, I think, to absorb that much faster and sort of get my chops that way.
Right. Wow. That's incredible. Well, and just driving up here, I saw DigiCert down there in Lehigh. Is that where the headquarters are?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Well, cool. So obviously it has now flourished to this company that is fairly big, right? And pretty cool that you spent 10 years there. And really interesting. I'm thrilled to be able to talk a little bit more just about like marketing principles, and it's just really cool to see your journey coming into it. You've been at Filevine for about 3 years now, correct?
That's right.
And I'd love to kind of dive deep into this role here because this is a big company. You said you have 400 plus employees. And so what are some of the marketing challenges that you've faced as you've come into this role and really have lived it the last 3 years? And how have you solved some of those challenges?
Yeah, it's always such an interesting question because when I'm out there sort of looking for information around marketing, I find all these great stories, but I find that I oftentimes have to adapt what's being told and try to pass it through the filter of like, how does this really apply to me? So right. I think I might just give a little bit of context. It really depends on the stage that you're in, and the challenges that you face always are just so different. And sometimes the things that actually get you to where you are become the very things that are holding you back from moving forward. So it's really an interesting question because I want to sort of caveat that with, for whoever's listening, just understand, boy, you've really got to think and contextualize on what's happening inside your business. This could be the right move for the wrong time. You've really got to think about these things dynamically. But when I think through Filevine, similar story to DigiCert in the sense that I joined when we were about 25 employees. We've grown in the last 3 years to about 450. Certainly, a viable path towards 500 or beyond. Really sort of, it's interesting. Hasn't felt like that in these 3 years, right? It's been a sort of a constant hunt and search for what you see as the next problem and how to just hunt that down, track it down, fix it, move it forward. I would just say, to answer your question, really one of the biggest challenges for us has been around positioning, because Filevine is a vertically oriented software that's competing with businesses that I think have developed a little bit more of a point solution. So what I mean by that is it's far easier to create a solution in a vacuum for a problem than it is to create a series of systems and processes and tools that can be configured to solve the problem. So we like to say Filevine built the tool that builds the tool. And we tend to go into this market competing with software that was built for a very specific purpose. It may be, how would you manage motor vehicle accident cases as a trial attorney? But what we did is we sort of identified this root cause analysis that these practices are so different from each other. And so instead of just trying to tackle the problem at hand, we tried to understand the core challenges of law firms. And truthfully, one of the core challenges is that they all operate so differently from one another. So we had to create a software that was highly configurable, highly customizable, that's really married with this incredible professional services organization that really seeks to understand what their problems are and then help configure the software for them. That's something that's a little bit bespoke to their organization. And how do you sort of message that versus somebody else who's basically saying, oh, we do the same thing and we're just, this is so easy to set up. That required a lot of education in the marketplace and a lot of sort of teaching. And I think, frankly, at the end of the day, results, and those results speak for themselves, and those customers talk to each other, and sort of helping facilitate that community and those customers talking to each other, that then create some network effects that then come back to the business.
Geez, that's amazing. So how long did that process take? Like you say, positioning, and I think as a consumer or someone who's looking at the business outside in, it's just like, oh, positioning, it took some effort to kind of figure that out. But how long was that actual process? I'd love to get some context there.
It's still going.
It's still going.
Absolutely. Good. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yep. Our business is, a business that isn't growing and thriving is dying. And so it is sort of in flux. And our in the last 3 years, Filevine has gone from sort of one primary application to a very specific niche to now a lot of within the legal industry, a number of different areas with very different use cases. And we actually have at this point, I think, 5 different product brands. So we're actually really had to mature our entire model to understand who are we talking to at what point in the buyer's journey, and what are the things that are important to them, and how are they different from each other. And in some of our customer cases, we actually find that they may have diametrically opposed goals. And so you have to be careful if you speak to one and how Filevine solves for those concerns. It may actually alienate this other potential customer base of yours. So it really requires understanding the mediums and the customers and where they are. And frankly, it just starts with really robust tracking at the start to get a good mix and a good map of what that looks like. So then you can then apply the right messages at the right times to the right places.
You know, that brings up a good point, because I was just thinking, right? Like if we're speaking in terms of legal terms, legal terminology, obviously your customer base is going to be thinking very differently than the average customer. And from what I understand, you don't necessarily have any legal background. Is that correct?
That's right.
So how are you able to kind of understand their consumer behavior?
Yeah, I think when I think through my career, I mean, I spent 10 years marketing to IT security professionals. I spent 2 years in Washington, D.C. marketing to DevOps professionals. I mean, talk about talking through EC2s and AWS Lambda and some of those things. Certainly didn't know. And then now in the legal space. So I would tell you it starts with really a couple of things. One is a natural curiosity. And the second is, I think, an underrepresented attribute that marketers need to cultivate, which is empathy. It really requires putting yourself in that customer's shoes and walking a little bit in that journey to just understand what they're feeling, what they're trying to solve. Because at the end of the day, these customers, I hate to say it, but they don't really care about you. They're not buying your software because they care so much. And man, marketers fall into this trap so often of just sort of showing the features and expecting people to care about things the same way that they care about them. And they don't. They're going through these big challenges, and their businesses, they're really sort of going on their own journey trying to tackle these issues. And if you can at least align with that and try to put yourself in those shoes, then your marketing does a huge difference, almost a 180 really, in how you go about approaching those customers.
Right. Wow, that's amazing. Now, what's your approach finding new customers? Are you going more of, sales to sales referrals, or are you doing any digital paid advertising?
In the last 15 years, I've done it all at this point. Okay. So Filevine specifically, what we find is our customers, again, you sort of have to put yourself in their shoes. Right. What are they doing and where are they going? Private law practices still, to this day, have quite a lot of in-person or person-to-person communication, obviously not as much physically, but right. With virtual, and specifically, they have to get continuing learning education credits, so CLEs. So you have to put yourself in their shoes and say, well, where are they? Where are these conversations happening? And that's where you want to spend your time as a marketer. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you ever find that, because I've talked to a lot of legal firms who really haven't gotten on board with any digital experience, do you ever find that issue, or are you more seeking for customers who are already in that digital space? Both, certainly. Okay. I do think legal is an area that has been a little bit technologically laggard compared to other industries.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that it is easy to look at that and think they're just behind the times. I actually think it's quite the opposite. I think that you have a highly intelligent workforce that is very motivated, very ambitious and driven. One of the hardest sort of, most hours put into a profession, certainly plenty of schooling that has to go into it. I actually think it is a very deeply challenging thing to transform that organization. And once it finds a system that works, it's a little bit of an innovator's dilemma because, well, let me even take a step back. If you look at our keyboards today, you have the QWERTY system. And the QWERTY system is not the most efficient way to type. There's actually a layout of keyboards that is proven to be faster to type. But the problem was that keyboard was too fast when these were mechanically driven. And so they actually needed to slow down typing speed, which is where the QWERTY system came up with, or was sort of devised. But now we're sort of stuck with it, right? Could you imagine trying, try changing your handwriting. Try changing the way you type. I was a generation that grew up double spacing after every sentence, and I had to physically put a right on my hand saying no, to single space to get myself to switch over to the system that basically everybody born after 1990 has been taught to use.
Right.
And imagine doing that with a whole keyboard. And it's like that for attorneys, but except instead of a keyboard or instead of a handwriting, you're talking about people's lives. I mean, you're talking about massive cases that set precedent. You're talking about multi-million-dollar judgments. You're talking about instances of jail time. These are things that cannot fail. They just cannot fail.
Right.
And so the system has to be so robust, and it has to be so buttoned up that nothing can go wrong. And you're talking about changing that out. I mean, it's a really sort of challenging thing. And I think the fact that they are moving to a full digital transformation just speaks so much to the broader industry movement that I think is sort of a foregone conclusion at this point. And I think, certainly with coronavirus, we've probably seen 5 years of digital transformation that's been accelerated in just such a short time frame that it's really forced it to move forward in a way that it was going. But it's not an easy thing at all for attorneys.
Jeez. Yeah, and that puts such a great perspective on it. Something that, yes, must be buttoned up so well and so tight. And really, really amazing that your company has managed to do that, right? To do that for customers. And I was looking on your website. I mean, you seem to be kind of a project management. You seem to be, are you more of like a contact management system as well?
Yes.
Just kind of an all over thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the danger is, right, if you're everything, then you're nothing. That is certainly not the case. There's a few comparables, but I think probably the best way to think of Filevine is if you were to combine Salesforce and Asana or Workfront, that's what Filevine is. It is the system of record for these attorneys. They log in at 8 a.m. and they log out at 6 p.m. and then they go home and they finish their work inside Filevine. Our users conduct a lot of activity in Filevine each day. It's sort of the center of gravity, and not just for the law firms, but also legal departments for corporate counsel, organizations. We have certainly some prosecutors and public defenders, pretty much anybody that's doing legal work. We look at Filevine as sort of sitting at the intersection of legal work and business, and everything that entails is where we are.
Jeez. That's amazing. Well, super cool to learn a little bit more about Filevine. I feel like the average customer, if they're not in that legal space, it's hard to understand exactly what you do, how you help law firms, and very, very cool space to be in. Let's take a step back here and kind of talk about your overall career, because I want to talk about some of maybe the key takeaways that you've not only had in this role, but also just the last years and years of marketing experience. What are those things that you feel are fundamental, core, things that really are not going to go away anytime soon?
Marketing is a profession that has existed for such a long time. And it's interesting that I think, the phrase, "a painter's house is never painted," comes to mind. Marketers have done, frankly, a terrible job of marketing their positions. I think that the common perception is so wildly different from the actual practice of marketing. So when we talk about these things that are evergreen, that will never change, I have to think through the fact that marketers really, at their core, are in a position of trust. And they're trust brokers. They're the ones making promises, and they're the ones that are helping the business to ensure that they're fulfilling those promises, or making sure that they're not making promises they shouldn't be. They're cultivating trust with potential prospects, with customers, that put their trust in the business, with making a purchase, and sort of helping make sure that experience delivers those expectations. And then I would also say the third stakeholder in this is internally. Marketing makes certain assertions inside the business of what it can and can't do, and it has to facilitate that trust internally. So, there's a million ways we could dissect this, but I actually really think it starts with trust.
Jeez. Yeah, and that's something that is such a such a valid point, and something that I think a lot of marketers have taken for granted. Maybe because I feel like a lot of consumers are slowly, if marketing is done right, losing trust in marketing. And it's really interesting how someone with a trust or kind of honest perspective, someone who can come in and say, listen, this is what we're trying to do. We're not trying to scam you. We're not trying to do something deceitful. We want to truly help you. We want to truly bring value to you. That sounds like marketing right there.
Yeah, well, the bad marketing sticks out.
Right, absolutely.
So every bad sales experience you have, it sort of forms your opinion and you think, oh, I hate salespeople. But the best salespeople, you actually want to be their friends. And they're actually helping you with your goals, right? They are aligning together with you and helping you achieve with a win-win scenario. And I think about marketing the same way. Bad marketing really sticks out. And it sticks out in ways that are really hard to ignore because it's easier to get sort of a quick win by throwing a bunch of money, getting your ad placed in some place that doesn't really line up. It just stands out in a way that's just so easy to see. The best marketing is marketing that you're not necessarily noticing, but it is helping to capture your interest and it's helping to sort of motivate you to take the right steps so that ultimately you can be happy with the decisions you're making.
Gosh, great comments on that. Well, and I want to continue to kind of go down this route and just talk about some of these skill sets, some of these things that are really critical. And I feel like, trust is a very, very important one. But as kind of a marketing industry leader, certainly in Utah, and you really hold a very important position in this company. What are some of those skill sets that you think are very valuable, like in the marketing space? What is something that every marketer needs to know in order to succeed?
Sure. I think we've been a little bit theoretical, so let's sort of get down to brass tacks and what it means to actually facilitate that trust between a business and a customer and sort of internally among stakeholders. I think one skill every marketer needs to cultivate is storytelling. It's at the very center of what you do. You are telling a story, and you need to make sure that that lines up with the vision, the mission of the business, with the needs of the customer. But you really sort of have to connect the dots between all those different areas and weave a narrative that's sort of salient and easy for people to put together. To do that, you must be an effective communicator. That's just table stakes. If you want to get into this game, you got to get good at that.
Yeah.
I would also add to that, you have to get comfortable putting yourself out there in front of an audience. That is a skill in and of itself. You have to take some shots because there's nothing more scary to a marketer than the moment before hitting send on an email that can never be recalled. Right?
I know that feeling.
That goes out to an audience of 100,000 readers.
Yep.
You've got to get comfortable being uncomfortable with some of those things, and so cultivating certainly your communication skills, certainly orally, in writing, in presentation of yourself, and understanding how you are presenting is almost as important as what you are saying, and maybe even. Maybe I'll walk that back. It's probably equally as important. The way that you say things is equally important to what you actually say and how that communicates the overall sort of story. And then getting comfortable with the fact that some people might not like it. And, your job is still sort of to be in front of that audience and to put it out there, to be brave and, listen to that feedback so you can incorporate that, and having the humility to recognize when you may have missed the mark and, to take that feedback and criticism and use that to improve in the next time.
Wow. Yeah, and that's something that you can practice every day. Something that you can practice in your writing, in your daily interactions with people. And I just love that. Do you have any other ways to continuously practice those kind of skills?
Totally.
Yeah. What are some ways you suggest?
Yeah. Well, you're doing it right now. Actually, I would say, this is seriously, find a creative outlet to be able to do that. Some of the best marketers I know run successful blogs. They'll be writing. They have a lot of sort of side hustles, whether it makes money or not. It tends to be very additive to the work that they're doing in marketing. We have a videographer who's just incredible. And, that's something that he loves to do. He puts together film, and he does music. These areas that sort of are classically considered to be creative outlets, I find them to be really valuable, not in the sense of the creativity, but in the notion of creating something from the heart and sharing that with the world, and then sort of the fear that creates and overcoming that, and sort of that constant cycle of going back and forth with it. So certainly I think, finding some of those opportunities to craft a message and share it with the world and get beat up a little bit.
That's awesome. Well, and I feel like there's plenty of opportunities to do that these days. So
there's never been more. Start a YouTube channel, stick with it, but make it something that you really care about, you're passionate about, and use it to sort of craft these skills in practice.
Yeah, well, and one thing you talked about is kind of putting yourself out there and taking criticism, right? And that's something that I think a lot of people have fear putting themselves out there and starting to kind of practice these creative skills. But, I can say from my perspective, it's not that bad. Whenever someone criticizes me, it's not that bad. I can take it. But yeah, really, really awesome advice. This kind of ties in with something on your LinkedIn profile, and I wrote it down because I love it so much. You put it in your description. You said, a firm believer that attitude delivers above all else. Skills, talents, and abilities are secondary to the ability to visualize and work towards goals. So I would love to hear a little bit more about your thinking on that, why you feel like that's important.
Well, first of all, I would say this is a good reminder that anything you write on the internet 5 or 10 years ago can show up later. So I'm glad this one is sort of viewed as a pontificating and sort of a wise statement. I do firmly believe this. It is an area that I think has been reaffirmed to me over time. I will put a caveat in here, which is that the right attitude will deliver the skills, talents, and abilities that are needed to be successful. But I put attitude first for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that I think a natural talent, a natural sort of skill set can become a set of golden handcuffs for you. Sort of coming back to that phrase I said before, what got you here won't get you there. And I think it's sort of easy to use this as a crutch, because if you have some of these natural born talents, that you can sort of lean into those things. But ultimately, boy, I just have to think, some of the best marketers I know, what do I think about them? What are some of the things that stand out to me? Authenticity is one. Authenticity comes back to that point about trust. It's being that true self in that individual, and they're authentic. And so when they speak, you can believe them, you trust them. And when they tell you a compelling story, you want inherently to actually to kind of just buy into that. I think about that ability to receive criticism that we just talked about. That doesn't mean being bowled over. It doesn't mean that somebody is, you're just going to kind of fold when somebody says something to you. It's actually having that natural desire and curiosity to improve. And so you are actively seeking that out. And I think if you really want to know some genuine areas of improvement, it's not always comfortable, but it is something that what you're doing is you're developing a skill where you can receive this feedback, index it into some areas. Do you believe it? Do you not? Right. If you do believe it, what does that mean in terms of how I change and do things differently? And then do I actually change that? Do I engage that? And do I see that it actually makes a difference coming back to me? And so you're kind of creating this natural cycle of this curiosity and willingness to learn and sort of be receptive to change. Because the moment you've got it all figured out, the moment that you can do no wrong. And I'll tell you, I still fall victim to this. It's far easier to say, you know what, you're wrong. Right. or this wasn't my fault because of this other thing. Right. But if you can actually have that accountability and sort of the vulnerability to accept the fact that, hey, maybe you screwed this up, then you've got a chance to progress. But the moment you've got it all figured out, you're done. There's no more progression, right? If you're already at 100, then there's nowhere else to go beyond that. So I like to think that the natural level is maybe I'm not at 100%. Maybe I'm at 80% or 85%. I'm pretty good. I'm going to have some confidence to get out there. But I need to learn that next little thing. That next incremental knowledge piece is where that growth happens. And without that, then you're stuck where you are.
Oh man, that is golden advice, especially like in your roles, right? If you don't have, I love that perspective, like that attitude is really the difference maker between growing and not growing. And I think what you wrote, if it was 10 years ago, honestly rings so true. And that's one reason I loved it, is having that right. And it would be tough to have the right attitude sometimes. There's times where failure takes over and it's difficult. But what are some, let's ask you this. So if you could go back to your younger self, and maybe this is like at the very beginning of your career, you've had all this marketing experience. If you could go back, what would you tell yourself?
If I could go back, I mean, aside from buying Bitcoin, man, there's just so many things to think about. It's an interesting game to play. I find myself sometimes just sort of saying, if I could go back in time, knowing what I know now, right, what would be different?
Right.
It is a bit paradoxical because I wouldn't be who I am, right, if I didn't know some of those things I did at the time. Right. But in terms of knowledge, so tips for marketers in particular, I think it's interesting. I would actually give very different advice. What I would say is, let me flip the question around on you. Can I do this?
Love it. Yeah.
Okay. So what if instead of going back in time, knowing what I know and telling myself, what if I said I could go and pull myself from that time to now? What would I tell them?
Ooh, I like that.
And I would actually say it's so interesting because when I started my career, digital was such this new and exciting frontier.
Right.
I mean, nobody knew anything about AdWords and spending and costs and all these other areas. I would say a lot of these areas have become kind of table stakes for doing marketing. And I think that a young marketer today needs to learn the art of the sale. They need to learn building personal connections and maybe kind of coming back to a theme here, but building some of that empathy and understanding the needs of individuals. I think that the pendulum has swung a little bit far towards metrics, and it's somewhat easy to sort of, and I say easy in quotation marks, but in the SaaS B2B space in particular, there's all these formulas that have been somewhat figured out. And it's almost prescriptive in the sense of, if you can get your cost per acquisition here, and you can get your MQL targets and your targets for an MQL to an SQL, and close rates and average deal size, and you plug them all into a formula, and then you're successful. I find myself falling guilty of that sometimes too, because it's so just tempting to say, that's just all you got to do, and now my marketing is going to work. But there's still this element of that personal connection and the art of marketing that I think has actually started to fall a little bit by the wayside in this sort of pursuit of targeted marketing and messages and all these other areas. So I would tell myself to learn to form an opinion, to take that opinion and bring it to market in a variety of different ways, in creative ways, and try to sort of build those personal connections as best as possible, because there's all this knowledge in the world around all the systems and formulas. I think that's all areas that you can find. But the art and sort of that creative aspect is something that needs some more cultivation.
I love it. And I love the flipped question. I think I should start asking that more.
Well, thank you.
And maybe along the same line, are there any other tips or things that you would tell young, ambitious marketers who are just entering the market? Anything else?
Do a lot of different things. This is an area, the larger a business is, the more specialized roles tend to become. Smaller businesses, I think you have a lot more latitude to operate in a variety of different areas, but you won't have sort of the support and mentorship that you need.
Right.
So my recommendation would be to either, find a smaller organization that gives you latitude to try different things, to break and to learn from those mistakes, to be able to do that, or try to find a number of different roles in larger organizations and test it out. I think one of the things that's been really successful for a marketer in today's world is to understand the business needs from every different aspect inside the company. It might be difficult if your goal is to get into marketing to hear some feedback that says things like, try some sales, try some implementations, try customer support. But I think that getting a broad-based knowledge and understanding helps inform where marketing can be the most effective, because it is an area that I think can become a little bit insular, in the sense that marketing kind of gets in its own head and thinks that that's how the whole world operates, is the way that marketing does. But kind of those two areas, try different roles in the business while you can, sort of early in your career, sort of understand what marketing looks like from an outside perspective and how it affects the whole business. And then number two, once you are in that path in marketing, try to get into a few different areas of marketing itself, because I've got to say, the jobs are so different. I can't think of any department in any business that has so much variability in the roles inside of it. So just try to expose yourself to as much as you can when it comes to marketing. And I think what you'll find is a natural desire and sort of tendency, and you'll find a few areas where you start to excel that become really informative in terms of where you go from there.
Geez, that's solid advice. Travis, thank you. We are already at 34 minutes. It's just crazy how fast these things go. You have just provided so much value, and I appreciate you giving all your great advice, especially for young marketers like myself. Definitely helps to learn from people like you. So really appreciate you. If people want to learn more about yourself, where should they go?
LinkedIn is always the best place for me.
Okay.
I should open up some more channels. So we want to talk about some of these marketing areas, some more conversion channels. But certainly on LinkedIn, it's easy enough to find Travis Tidball. I love just talking shop. I love talking business. Marketing is an area that I think has such an opportunity as a leveraged business unit to really just change how whole organizations operate, and reach out anytime.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, and I appreciate this. We'll have to stay in contact. This has just been such a great interview, and I'm excited to see what happens with Filevine going
Awesome.
forward.
Thanks,
awesome.
Jake.
Thanks.